She walked into the marble ballroom in a borrowed dress, enduring whispers and cold stares from people who saw her as nothing. But when the groom locked eyes with her during his vows, he went pale, abandoned his bride at the altar, crossed the room, and bowed low, calling her the one name that would shatter every assumption in that room. Welcome back, my amazing family. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your love and support mean the world, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get right into the story. The coffee shop on 7th Street had terrible lighting and chairs that wobbled, but it was the only place in the city where Zola felt like she could breathe. She sat in the corner booth every Tuesday and Thursday morning, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard as she managed an empire no one in that tiny shop could imagine. The barista knew her as the quiet one who tips well. The regulars knew her as the woman who smiled softly but never stayed long enough to chat. That was exactly how Zola liked it. Her phone buzzed against the scarred wooden table. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach tighten. Kalen's name glowed there, accompanied by a photo of him laughing, his blue eyes crinkled at the corners, his sandy hair falling across his forehead in that careless way that made her heart skip. She answered. "Hey, you. Zola." His voice was warm, like honey over toast. "I'm outside. Can I come in?" She looked toward the fogged window and saw his silhouette through the glass. Even standing on a cracked sidewalk in front of a rundown coffee shop, Kalen Sterling managed to look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal coat that probably cost more than most people's rent. "You know you don't have to ask," she said, already smiling. He walked in, bringing with him a gust of cold November air and the faint scent of his cologne. The barista's eyes widened slightly. Kalen had that effect on people, but he barely noticed. His attention was fixed entirely on Zola as he slid into the booth across from her. "You're working," he observed, glancing at her laptop screen. "Always." She closed it gently. "But I can take a break for you." He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. For a moment, they just looked at each other. This was what Zola loved most about Kalen, the way he could sit in comfortable silence, the way he never needed her to be anything other than herself. They had met 6 months ago in this very shop. She'd been lost in spreadsheets, barely aware of her surroundings, when someone had accidentally knocked her coffee over. Kalen had been mortified, insisting on buying her another, then another, and somehow one conversation had turned into 2 hours, which had turned into exchanged numbers, which had turned into this. He didn't know who she really was. Nobody did. To Kalen, she was Zolan Kosi, a quiet, independent woman who did consulting work and preferred small coffee shops to fancy restaurants. She'd never corrected him when he assumed she lived modestly, never showed him the penthouse she actually called home, never mentioned the 9-figure bank account or the portfolio of companies she controlled from behind carefully constructed corporate veils. Zollivants. That was her real identity. The founder and sole owner of Vance Capital, one of the most mysterious and powerful venture capital firms in the country. She'd built it from nothing over 15 years, starting with a single risky investment and a brilliant mind for seeing potential where others saw only failure. Now, Vance Capital's fingerprints were on dozens of success stories, tech startups, real estate empires, manufacturing companies pulled back from the brink of collapse. But nobody knew her face. Nobody knew her name. She'd structured everything through layers of lawyers and proxy executives, conducting all her meetings through video calls with her camera off or through written correspondence. In a world obsessed with celebrity CEOs and personal brands, Zollivants remained a ghost. And Zola intended to keep it that way. "You're thinking hard about something," Kalen said, breaking into her thoughts. "I can see it in your eyes." She squeezed his hand. "Just work stuff. Nothing important." "Everything about you is important to me." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. God, she loved this man. There's something I wanted to ask you, Kalen continued, and now there was a note of hesitation in his voice that made Zola's radar ping. My sister Clarissa is getting married next month. Big event. Very. Sterling family. He grimaced slightly at that last part. I'd really like you to come with me. As my date. Zola's first instinct was to refuse. She'd successfully avoided meeting Kalen's family for 6 months, and that had been entirely intentional. She knew who the Sterlings were, old money, New England pedigree, the kind of people who appeared in society pages and sat on charity boards. Kalen had mentioned them in passing, always with a certain tightness around his eyes that told her the relationship was complicated. She also knew that the Sterlings would take one look at her, a black woman with no obvious pedigree, no designer clothes, no connection to their world, and decide she wasn't good enough for their golden boy. But when she looked at Kalen's face, saw the vulnerability there, the hope, she found herself reconsidering. You really want me there? She asked quietly. More than anything. I know my family can be. He paused, searching for the right word. Difficult. But you're important to me, Zola. I want them to know that. I want them to know you. There was something in his voice that made her chest ache. Kalen rarely talked about his family, but she'd picked up enough to understand that he felt like an outsider in his own life, a sensitive, artistic soul born into a family of ruthless businesspeople and social climbers. He'd chosen a career in architecture instead of finance, had moved away from the family estate, had built a life that was quieter and more genuine than the one they'd mapped out for him. And now he was asking her to step into that world with him. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll go. The smile that broke across Kalen's face was worth every moment of anxiety the decision triggered. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Thank you. I promise I'll make it as painless as possible. They both knew that was a lie, but Zola appreciated the sentiment anyway. Over the next 3 weeks, Zola tried to prepare herself for what was coming. She knew the Sterling family's reputation, she'd actually done business with several companies in their sphere, though they'd never know it. Old money combined with new investments, political connections that ran deep, and a social circle that could make or break reputations with a single whispered word. She'd faced down hostile boardrooms, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and rebuilt failing companies from the ground up. Surely she could handle one wedding. But as the date approached, a familiar anxiety began to creep in. It was the same feeling she'd had as a child, growing up in a small town in Georgia where she'd been one of only 3 black families. The feeling of being watched, judged, found wanting. She'd spent years building walls around herself, creating a persona that was untouchable because it was invisible. Now Kalen was asking her to step into the light. The invitation arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, delivered to Kalen's apartment in a thick cream envelope with elegant calligraphy. He showed it to Zola over dinner at her place, one of the rare times he'd been there, though she'd carefully hidden any evidence of her wealth before his arrival. The Sterling estate, he read aloud, his tone dry. Ceremony at 4, reception to follow. Black tie. He looked up at her. I'm sorry. I know this isn't your scene. It's fine, Zola said, though her mind was already racing. Black tie meant an expensive dress, the right shoes, the right jewelry. She had all of those things, of course. Her closet at home contained enough designer pieces to stock a boutique, but she couldn't show up looking too polished without raising questions about where a consultant got that kind of money. She'd have to find something appropriate but not too expensive looking. Another costume for another role. My mother called yesterday, Kalen added, picking at his food. She wanted to know more about you. I kept it vague. What did you tell her? That you're brilliant, kind, and you make me happier than I've been in years. He met her eyes. She didn't seem thrilled. Because I'm black, Zola said flatly. Kalen flinched but didn't deny it. My family is, they're not overtly racist. They'd never say anything explicitly. But they have certain expectations about who I should be with. Someone from their world. Someone who looks like them. His jaw tightened. I don't care what they think. I need you to know that. Zola reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. I know. But Kalen, are you ready for what might happen? If they don't accept me, then that's their loss. He said it firmly, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. Family was complicated, especially families like the Sterlings. Blood and money and expectation all tangled together into knots that were almost impossible to untie. She wondered what he would do when he found out who she really was. Would he be angry that she'd kept it from him? Relieved? Confused? She'd thought about telling him 100 times, had practiced the words in her head. Kalen, there's something you should know about me. I'm not who you think I am. But every time, fear stopped her. Not fear of his reaction, fear of losing the one pure thing in her life. In this coffee shop corner of her existence, with Kalen, she got to be just Zola. Not the powerful Zollivants, not the mysterious investor, not the woman who could make or break companies with a single email. Just Zola, who drank too much coffee and laughed at Kalen's terrible jokes and felt normal for the first time in 15 years. She wasn't ready to give that up yet. So she squeezed his hand and smiled and said, then we'll face whatever comes together. The night before the wedding, Zola stood in front of her closet in her penthouse, the real one, not the modest apartment Kalen thought she lived in, and stared at her options. She'd sent her assistant out to find something appropriate, elegant but not too elegant, expensive but not obviously so. The dress they'd selected was a deep navy blue, simple in cut with a modest neckline and 3/4 sleeves. Beautiful but understated. The kind of dress that would let her fade into the background. Exactly what she needed. She tried it on, studying herself in the mirror. Even dressed down, even trying to minimize herself, she knew what the Sterlings would see, a black woman who didn't belong in their world. She'd faced that look before, that careful assessment that found her lacking before she'd even opened her mouth. But this time was different. This time, she was walking in with Kalen, who loved her. And this time, though they didn't know it yet, she was walking in as the most powerful person in that room. The thought made her smile, just a little. Her phone buzzed. Kalen, can't wait to see you tomorrow. I love you. She texted back, love you too. See you at 3. Tomorrow, she would enter the Sterling family's world. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know how much. The Sterling estate sat behind iron gates in Connecticut, sprawling across 20 acres of manicured lawn that rolled toward Long Island Sound. Zola watched it approach through the car window as Kalen drove up the long private drive, her stomach tightening with each passing second. You okay? Kalen glanced at her, his hand finding hers on the console. Just taking it all in, she said, which was true enough. The mansion itself was a monument to old money, gray stone, tall windows, ivy climbing the walls like it had been there since the Revolutionary War. Mercedes and BMWs and Teslas lined the circular driveway. Women in furs and men in expensive overcoats streamed toward the entrance, their breath misting in the December cold. Zola had grown up in a 3-bedroom house with vinyl siding and a chain-link fence. This was a different universe. Kalen parked and came around to open her door, offering his hand. His touch steadied her. When she stepped out, the cold air bit at her exposed skin, and she was immediately aware of eyes turning toward them. A couple near the entrance paused mid-conversation, their gazes sliding over her with barely concealed curiosity. Kalen. A woman's voice cut through the murmur of arriving guests. A blonde in her 50s approached, dripping diamonds, her smile wide and utterly false. Darling, you're here. Mother. Kalen's grip on Zola's hand tightened. This is Zolan Kosi. Zola, my mother, Victoria Sterling. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes, cold, assessing, swept over Zola from head to toe in 3 seconds flat. The verdict was clear in the slight tightening around her mouth. How lovely to meet you, Victoria said, extending a hand that felt like touching porcelain. Kaelin has mentioned you. All good things, I hope, Zola replied evenly, matching the woman's grip with quiet confidence. Of course. Victoria's attention had already shifted back to her son. Darling, the ceremony starts in an hour. Clarissa is upstairs having a minor meltdown about her veil. Perhaps you could. I'm staying with Zola, Kaelin said firmly. A flash of irritation crossed Victoria's face before she smoothed it away. Of course. Well, cocktails are being served in the East Parlor. Do help yourselves. Her gaze flickered back to Zola, cool and dismissive. I'm sure you'll find the event educational. She swept away before either of them could respond. Jesus, Kaelin muttered. I'm sorry. She's exactly what I expected, Zola finished. She squeezed his hand. I can handle your mother, Kaelin. Come on. Let's get that drink. Inside, the mansion was even more impressive, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, walls lined with art that probably belonged in museums. The East Parlor was already crowded with guests, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a Vanity Fair spread. Jewels glittered at throats and wrists. Designer labels screamed from every dress and suit. And there, in the middle of it all, was Zola in her simple navy dress. She felt the stares like physical touches. Heard the whispers that weren't quite whispered enough. Who is that with Kaelin? I've never seen her before. Is she? I mean, where did he meet her? Kaelin's jaw clenched. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, protective. But Zola could feel the tension radiating from him, could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He wanted to say something, to defend her, but what could he say that wouldn't make it worse? She was saved by the appearance of a young woman in a cloud of white tulle, Clarissa, the bride. She was beautiful in that sharp-edged way that came from good genes and better cosmetic work, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style, her makeup flawless. Kaelin. She descended on them with a squeal, throwing her arms around her brother. Then she pulled back and her eyes landed on Zola. Oh. You must be the girlfriend. There was something in the way she said, girlfriend, like it was a temporary condition, barely worth acknowledging. Zola, Kaelin said, his voice tight. This is my sister, Clarissa. Welcome, Clarissa said, and now her smile was all saccharine sweetness. I'm so glad you could make it. Kaelin said you had to borrow a dress for the occasion. Her eyes traveled over Zola's outfit. It's lovely. Very simple. The jab landed exactly as intended. Zola felt it, a small sting beneath her ribs. Thank you, she said calmly. You look beautiful. Congratulations on your marriage. Oh, I know. Clarissa laughed, a tinkling sound that grated. Marcus is absolutely perfect. Stanford MBA, his family owns half of Boston, and he's gorgeous. I'm very lucky. She leaned in conspiratorially, though her voice carried. You know, Kaelin, maybe Zola could use some help getting ready. I have my stylist upstairs. She could do something with her hair, maybe add some jewelry. We want everyone to look their best in the photos. The offer was poison wrapped in ribbon. Kaelin's face flushed. Clarissa. That's kind of you, Zola interrupted, her voice steady even as humiliation burned in her chest. But I'm fine as I am. Are you sure? Clarissa's eyes gleamed with false concern. I just want you to feel comfortable. I know this world can be intimidating for people who aren't, well, used to it. There it was. The blade, sliding between Zola's ribs with surgical precision. Zola felt Kaelin's entire body go rigid beside her. His hand on her waist tightened, and when he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous in a way she'd never heard before. Clarissa, that's enough. His sister blinked, her expression all innocence. What? I'm just trying to help. I want everyone to feel welcome. You're being cruel, Kaylin said flatly. And we both know it. For a moment, something ugly flashed across Clarissa's perfect features. Then she laughed again, that same brittle sound. Oh, Kaylin, you're so sensitive. I'm sure Zola knows I didn't mean anything by it. She turned to Zola, her smile sharp as glass. You understand, don't you? I'm just looking out for my brother. Zola met her gaze steadily. She'd dealt with women like Clarissa before, women who hid their venom behind concern, who wielded social niceties like weapons. In boardrooms, she crushed them without a second thought. But here, as just Zola, she had to play a different game. I appreciate your concern, she said evenly. But I'm perfectly comfortable. Clarissa's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing. She'd expected tears, maybe, or anger. Not this calm composure. Well, she said after a beat, the offer stands. My stylist is in the West Wing if you change your mind. She kissed Kaylin's cheek, leaving a smudge of lipstick. I need to finish getting ready. Try to relax, brother. It's a wedding, not a funeral. She swept away in a cloud of expensive perfume and tulle, leaving Kaylin vibrating with barely contained fury. I'm going to kill her, he muttered. She's not worth it, Zola said, though her own hands were trembling slightly. Come on. Let's get that drink you promised me. They made their way to the bar, and Zola was acutely aware of the eyes that followed them. The whispers had gotten louder, less discreet. She caught fragments as they passed. Can't believe he brought her here. So inappropriate. What was he thinking? The bartender, a young man in a crisp white shirt, gave them a professional smile. What can I get you? Scotch, Kaylin said tersely. Double. White wine, please, Zola added. As the bartender poured, a man approached them. Older, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from winter vacations in the Caribbean. Kaylin Sterling, he boomed, hand extended. Haven't seen you since the Vanderbilt Gala. How's the architecture business? Good, Mr. Patterson, Kaylin replied, shaking his hand. His other arm remained firmly around Zola's waist. This is my girlfriend, Zolan Kosi. Patterson's eyes slid over Zola with the same assessing look Victoria had used. Charming, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. And what is it you do, my dear? Consulting, Zola said simply. How interesting. His voice dripped with condescension. What sort of consulting? Business strategy. Investment advice. That sort of thing. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Really? And where did you study? It was a trap, of course. The right answer would place her in their world, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Any other answer would confirm what they already believed, that she didn't belong. MIT, Zola said, which was true. She'd earned her MBA there 15 years ago, back before she'd become Zollivant's. Finance and entrepreneurship. Patterson looked genuinely surprised. MIT. Well. He recovered quickly. That's quite impressive. Though I imagine the consulting business must be challenging for someone starting out. I manage, Zola said, taking a sip of her wine. I'm sure you do. Patterson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, enjoy the wedding. Clarissa certainly spared no expense. Of course, when you're marrying into the Westbrook family, only the best will do. He clapped Kaylin on the shoulder. Your sister did well for herself. Excellent match. He walked away, leaving the implication hanging in the air, unlike this one. Kaylin downed half his scotch in one swallow. I hate these people, he said quietly. I've always hated them. The fake smiles, the judgment, the way they measure everyone's worth by their last name and their bank account. He looked at her, his eyes intense. You don't deserve this, Zola. Any of it. I'm okay, she said, and meant it. Because underneath the humiliation, underneath the sting of their casual cruelty, something else was building. A cold, quiet anger. These people, these proud, vicious people, had no idea who they were insulting. They saw her skin, her simple dress, her lack of pedigree, and decided she was nothing. They had no idea they were standing in the presence of the woman who could destroy their entire social circle with a single phone call. The thought should have made her feel powerful. Instead, it just made her sad. Because Kalen didn't know either. He was defending her so fiercely, standing up to his family, and he didn't know that she didn't need his protection. That she was stronger, richer, more influential than anyone in this room. That she'd been lying to him for 6 months. "Hey," Kalen said softly, tilting her chin up with gentle fingers. "Talk to me. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I should tell you the truth," she wanted to say. "I'm thinking I've built this relationship on a foundation of lies, and I don't know how to fix it without losing you." But instead, she smiled and kissed him. "I'm thinking I love you. And that we should probably find our seats before your sister sends out a search party." He kissed her back, soft and sweet, and for a moment the whole terrible place fell away. "I love you too," he murmured against her lips. "More than you know." "But not more than the truth," a voice whispered in her head. "Not when you find out I've been lying all along." The ceremony was set up in the estate's grand ballroom, transformed into something from a fairy tale. White roses cascaded from every surface, their scent heavy in the air. Crystal garlands hung from the ceiling, catching the light from dozens of candles. Chairs draped in ivory silk faced an altar constructed of white marble and more roses. It was breathtaking. It was excessive. It was everything Zola expected from people who measured love in dollar signs. Kalen led her to seats near the back, not the family section where he belonged, but further away, as if trying to shield her from his relatives. She appreciated the gesture even as it highlighted how foreign she was to this world. As they settled in, more guests filed past. Most ignored them completely. Some offered Kalen polite nods that stopped short of acknowledging Zola's existence. A few stared openly, their curiosity unmasked. "There's Aunt Patricia," Kalen muttered, nodding toward a statuesque woman in emerald silk. "She once told me I was disappointing the family by becoming an architect instead of going into private equity." He pointed to another cluster of guests. "That's Uncle Richard and his third wife. And over there, that's Kalen." Zola touched his arm. "You don't have to give me the family tree. I'm fine." But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw remained clenched. He was preparing for battle, readying himself to defend her against his own blood. It made her heart ache. A string quartet began to play, and the murmur of conversation died down. Victoria Sterling appeared at the front, taking her seat in the first row with the regal bearing of a queen. She didn't look back at Kalen, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. The groom entered from a side door. Marcus Westbrook was exactly what Zola had expected, tall, handsome in that bland, conventional way, his tuxedo perfectly tailored. He took his place at the altar, his smile confident, his posture that of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. But as he scanned the assembled guests, his eyes landed on Zola. And stopped. His smile faltered. Just for a second, just a tiny crack in that perfect composure. Then he looked away, but Zola had seen something flash across his face. Recognition? Confusion? She couldn't tell from this distance. "You okay?" Kalen whispered. "Fine," she said, though her heart had started beating faster. "Why? You went tense all of a sudden." She forced herself to relax. "Just wetting nerves. For them, I mean." The music swelled, and everyone rose as Clarissa made her entrance. She looked like a vision in white lace and silk, her veil trailing behind her like a cloud. Her smile was radiant, triumphant. This was her moment, her coronation as Mrs. Marcus Westbrook. But as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Zola noticed that Marcus's attention kept drifting. His eyes found Zola again, and this time the look lasted longer. His brow furrowed slightly, and he seemed to be trying to place her, to remember something just out of reach. Clarissa reached the altar, and her father lifted her veil, kissing her cheek before taking his seat. The officiant, some society minister with silver hair and a voice like warm honey, began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words washed over Zola, familiar and distant at once. She'd been to weddings before, had even considered marriage once, long ago before Vance Capital had consumed her life. But sitting here, watching Clarissa and Marcus exchange looks that were supposed to be loving but seemed more like satisfied business partners closing a deal, she felt oddly hollow. Was this what love looked like in their world? A transaction dressed up in white lace? She glanced at Kalen and found him watching her, his expression soft despite the hardness of his jaw. When their eyes met, he smiled, not the tight, angry smile he'd worn since they arrived, but the real one. The one that made her fall in love with him in that coffee shop 6 months ago. This is what love looks like, she thought. Not the flowers or the marble or the designer dress. Just this. Two people choosing each other. And she'd lied to him about who she was. The thought sat like a stone in her chest as the ceremony continued. The officiant spoke about commitment, about honesty, about building a life together on a foundation of trust. Each word felt like an accusation. "If anyone here has objections to this union," the officiant intoned, "speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence. Zola half expected someone to speak up, wasn't that what happened in the movies? But reality was quieter, more mundane. "Marcus Westbrook," the officiant continued, "do you take Clarissa Sterling to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond. But his eyes had drifted again, found Zola in the crowd. And this time, she saw the exact moment recognition clicked into place. His face went pale. "Marcus?" Clarissa prompted, her smile tightening. He wasn't looking at his bride. He was staring at Zola like he'd seen a ghost. "Marcus," Clarissa said again, louder now. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. And then Marcus did something that would echo through the Sterling family for years to come. He stepped back from the altar. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, his eyes still locked on Zola. "I need a moment." "What?" Clarissa's voice pitched up, her composure cracking. "Marcus, what are you doing?" But he was already moving, walking away from his bride, down the steps of the altar, into the aisle. Walking directly toward Zola. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Time seemed to slow. Every eye in the ballroom turned to watch Marcus Westbrook walk away from his bride, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with each deliberate step. Clarissa stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and humiliation in rapid succession. Kalen's hand found Zola's, gripping it tight. "What the hell is happening?" he whispered. Zola couldn't answer. Her throat had closed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew what was about to happen. Knew it with the same certainty she knew the sun would rise tomorrow. Her secret was about to detonate in the middle of Clarissa Sterling's perfect wedding. Marcus stopped 3 feet from their row. Up close, Zola could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief warring with recognition. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Is it really you?" The whispers exploded into full conversation. Heads turned, necks craned. Everyone was staring now, at Marcus, at Zola, trying to understand what could possibly make a groom abandon his bride at the altar. "Marcus." Zola's voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. "This isn't the time or place." "I don't understand," Kalen said beside her, his grip on her hand tightening. "Zola, do you know him?" Before she could answer, Marcus did something that sent a fresh wave of gasps through the crowd. He bowed. Not a polite nod, not a casual dip of the head. A full, deep bow of respect, the kind reserved for royalty or dignitaries, completely incongruous coming from a groom in the middle of his own wedding ceremony. "Ma'am," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd get the chance to thank you in person. You saved my life. You saved everything." Victoria Sterling rose from her seat in the front row, her face a mask of confusion and fury. "Marcus Westbrook, what is the meaning of this? Get back to the altar this instant." But Marcus wasn't listening. His attention was fixed entirely on Zola, his eyes shining with something that looked almost like reverence. 3 years ago, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, my company was dying. We'd made bad investments, trusted the wrong people, and we were weeks away from bankruptcy. I was going to lose everything my grandfather had built. Everything. He swallowed hard. And then I received an email from Vance Capital. Zola closed her eyes. Here it came. They offered to invest. No strings attached, no board seats demanded, just capital and guidance. The email was signed by someone who called themselves V. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. That investment saved my company. The strategic advice that followed made us what we are today. I've spent 3 years trying to find out who V was, trying to thank them, but Vance Capital is like a ghost. No one knows who runs it. No one has ever met the founder. He looked directly at Zola, and she saw understanding dawn across his face like sunrise. Until I walked into this ballroom today and saw you sitting there. And I realized, he stopped, seeming to gather his courage. You're her. You're V. You're Zollivant's. The name hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The name Zollivant's was legendary in certain circles, whispered about in boardrooms, speculated about in financial journals, discussed with a mixture of awe and frustration by people who tried and failed to unmask the mystery investor. Then the whispers started again, building like a wave. Zollivant's? That's impossible. She's the one who Vance Capital is worth. This can't be real. Zola felt Kalen's hand go slack in hers. She turned to look at him and saw her worst fear reflected in his face, betrayal. Confusion. The dawning realization that everything he thought he knew about her was a lie. Kalen, she started, but he pulled his hand away. Is it true? His voice was barely a whisper. Is he telling the truth? Before she could answer, Clarissa's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. This is ridiculous. She was marching down the aisle now, her dress gathered in her fists, her face flushed with rage. Marcus, have you lost your mind? This woman is nobody. She's Kalen's little charity case, some consultant he picked up God knows where. She doesn't even have a proper dress. But Marcus shook his head, never taking his eyes off Zola. You don't understand. This woman, he gestured to Zola with something approaching awe. This woman controls one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. She's a billionaire, Clarissa. She's probably the wealthiest person in this room. The ballroom exploded. People were standing now, their voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and shock. Some were pulling out phones, frantically Googling. Others were staring at Zola like she'd grown a second head. And in the front row, Victoria Sterling stood perfectly still, her face the color of old bone, as the full weight of her family's treatment of Zola crashed down on her like an avalanche. They'd mocked a billionaire. Insulted her. Treated her like she was nothing. And she'd let them. Zola rose slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate and calm despite the hurricane of noise swirling around her. She smoothed down her simple navy dress, the same dress Clarissa had sneered at, the same dress that now seemed almost symbolic of how thoroughly they'd misjudged her. Marcus, she said quietly, but somehow her voice cut through the chaos. You should return to your bride. Ma'am, I can't, I need to. He was fumbling over his words, this confident businessman reduced to a stammering mess. You saved everything. My company, my reputation, my family's legacy. I owe you more than I could ever repay. You owe me nothing, Zola said firmly. The investment was sound business. Your company had potential. That's all. But Marcus was shaking his head. It wasn't just the money. The advice, the strategy sessions through email, the way you guided us through the restructuring. His voice grew louder, addressing the crowd now. Do you all understand what Vance Capital is? They don't just throw money around. They're strategic, brilliant, and completely invisible. CEOs would kill for a meeting with V, and I had months of consultation. Months of guidance from the sharpest business mind I've ever encountered. This is insane, Clarissa hissed, but her voice had lost its edge. Uncertainty flickered across her face. You're telling me that she gestured at Zola with barely concealed contempt that was rapidly shifting to confusion. That this woman is some kind of secret billionaire? That's ridiculous. Google it, someone called from the crowd. Vance Capital. It's real. Phones were out now, glowing screens illuminating shocked faces as people searched. Zola could practically hear the collective realization spreading through the room like wildfire. Oh my God, a woman gasped. Vance Capital's portfolio is worth over $15 billion. It says here they've invested in over 100 companies. The founder's identity has never been confirmed. Holy shit, is it really her? Victoria Sterling finally found her voice. This is preposterous. Some kind of con. Marcus, you're clearly confused. I'm not confused, Mrs. Sterling. Marcus's voice was steel now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly. I have every email V ever sent me. Every piece of advice, every strategic recommendation. And 2 months ago, I finally convinced one of Vance Capital's lawyers to let me send a thank you gift. They refused, but they did agree to accept a photo, proof that my company was thriving because of their investment. He turned his phone toward the crowd, then toward Zola. On the screen was a photograph of Marcus standing in front of a gleaming office building, holding a sign that read, "Thank you, V, you saved us." Marcus Westbrook, CEO. I sent that photo to an encrypted email address, Marcus continued. And do you know what I received back? 3 words, proud of you. His voice cracked with emotion. And it was sent from that same address I've been corresponding with for 3 years. The one I'm looking at right now, the one I could forward to anyone in this room as proof. He turned to Zola, his eyes shining. When I saw you walk in today, something clicked. The way you carried yourself, the intelligence in your eyes. And I thought, no, it couldn't be. But then during the ceremony, I kept looking at you, and I knew. I just knew. Zola stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Inside, her mind was racing, calculating, trying to determine the best path forward. She could deny it. She could walk out of this ballroom and let them wonder. She could maintain the mystery. But then she looked at Kalen. He stood frozen beside their seats, his face pale, his eyes locked on her with an expression that shattered her heart. Pain. Betrayal. The devastation of realizing that the woman he loved had been someone else entirely all along. Kalen, she said softly, taking a step toward him. He stepped back. 6 months, he whispered. 6 months you let me think you were struggling. Let me worry about money, try to plan cheap dates so you wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You sat in that coffee shop with your laptop and I thought, his voice broke. I thought you were like me. Someone trying to escape this world, this life. Someone real. I am real, Zola said, her own voice cracking now. Everything between us was real. Was it? Kalen's laugh was hollow, bitter. Because I told you everything, Zola. Everything about my family, my life, my fears. And you never told me the truth. Not once. I wanted to. When? The word came out sharp as a knife. When were you going to tell me? After we got married? After you'd gotten tired of playing poor? The accusation hit like a slap. Around them, the Sterling family and their guests watched with rapt attention, no longer trying to hide their fascination with the unfolding drama. Clarissa stood beside her abandoned groom, her wedding in ruins, but even her fury seemed forgotten as she watched her brother's relationship crumble in real time. "I need air," Kalen said abruptly, and turned toward the exit. "Kalen, wait," Zola reached for him. But he was already gone, pushing through the crowd, leaving her standing alone in the center of the ballroom. Alone, and finally, irrevocably exposed. The silence that followed Kalen's exit was deafening. Zola stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of eyes, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. The walls she'd built so carefully over 15 years had crumbled in minutes, and now she stood in the rubble, exposed and vulnerable. Victoria Sterling was the first to recover. She glided forward with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating social disasters, her expression shifting from shock to something that might have been respect, or might have been fear. "Ms. Nkosi, or should I say, Ms. Zollivance," Victoria's voice was smooth as silk, but Zola could hear the calculation beneath it. "I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If we'd known who you were, you would have treated me differently," Zola finished, her voice quiet but carrying through the room. "Yes, I'm sure you would have." Victoria's smile tightened. "I merely meant that we would have shown you the respect your position deserves. Surely you understand." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Sterling." Zola turned to face her fully, and something in her expression made Victoria take a half step back. "I understand that you judged me the moment I walked through your door. That you found me lacking because of my skin, my dress, my apparent lack of pedigree. And now that you know I have money, suddenly I'm worthy of respect." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Several people had the grace to look ashamed. "That's not what Victoria started. "Yes, it is." Zola's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. The same steel that had built an empire from nothing, that had stared down hostile boardrooms and won. "You, your daughter, your friends, you all made your opinions clear. I was Kalen's charity case. Someone to be mocked, pitted, and dismissed." Clarissa pushed forward, her wedding dress dragging behind her like a deflated parachute. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged now, mascara running from tears of rage or humiliation or both. "How dare you," she spat. "You come into our home, you lie about who you are, you ruin my wedding." "I ruined your wedding?" Zola's eyebrow arched. "I was sitting quietly in the back row, Clarissa. Your groom is the one who recognized me and chose to leave the altar. Perhaps you should ask yourself why acknowledging my presence was more important to him than marrying you." The hit landed. Clarissa's face went red, then white. Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between them. "Ma'am, please. I never meant to cause such a scene. But I couldn't," he swallowed hard. "I couldn't stand there and pretend I didn't know who you were. Not after everything you've done for me." "What I did for you was business," Zola said, though her tone softened slightly. "Nothing more. It was more than business to me." Marcus's voice was fervent. "You believed in me when no one else did. When every bank turned me down, when investors laughed me out of their offices, you saw something worth saving. Do you know what that means to someone who's drowning?" Zola did know. She'd been that person once, desperate and drowning, before she'd learned to swim in shark-infested waters. Around them, the crowd had begun to murmur again. But the tone had shifted. Now there was awe mixed with the shock, fascination tinged with fear. Because they were beginning to understand what Marcus already knew, Zola wasn't just wealthy. She was powerful. The kind of power that could make or break careers with a single phone call. "I need to ask you something," came a voice from the crowd. An older man pushed forward, Patterson, the one who'd condescended to her earlier. His expression was carefully neutral now, all traces of his earlier contempt erased. "Vance Capital invested in the Meridian project 5 years ago." "That was you?" Zola met his gaze steadily. "Yes." "And the Cornerstone development deal? The one that saved half the commercial real estate market in Boston?" "Also me." Patterson's face had gone pale. "Jesus Christ. I tried to get a meeting with V for 2 years. Sent dozens of proposals. And you were," he looked at her simple dress, her understated jewelry, and she could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew. "You were right here. Would you have listened to my proposals if I'd walked into your office looking like this?" Zola asked quietly. "Or would you have had security escort me out?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because they all knew the truth. Victoria cleared her throat, her expression now carefully arranged into something that might have been contrition. "Ms. Zollivans, I believe we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we could start over. I'd love to invite you to lunch, discuss some charitable initiatives I'm involved with. I'm sure someone with your resources and vision could." "No." The single word stopped Victoria mid-sentence. "No." Victoria blinked, clearly unaccustomed to hearing that word. "I'm not interested in your lunch invitations, Mrs. Sterling. I'm not interested in your charity boards or your social redemption. An hour ago, I wasn't good enough to sit with your family. Now I'm suddenly worthy of your time." Zola shook her head slowly. "That's not how respect works." She turned, scanning the crowd for Kalen, but he was gone. Her chest tightened with a pain that had nothing to do with the Sterling's judgment and everything to do with the look on his face before he'd walked away. "If you'll excuse me," Zola said, gathering what remained of her dignity. "I need to find someone who actually matters to me." She walked toward the exit, her head high, her step steady. The crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, everyone suddenly eager to get out of her way. Behind her, she heard Clarissa's voice, shrill and breaking, "What about my wedding?" Zola didn't look back. Zola found Kalen outside, standing at the edge of the estate's sprawling lawn where manicured grass gave way to wild woods. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against the December cold. He didn't turn when she approached, but she saw his body tense, heard the slight hitch in his breathing that told her he knew she was there. "Kalen," she said softly. "Don't." His voice was rough, scraped raw. "Just, don't." She stopped a few feet behind him, her arms wrapped around herself against the bitter wind. Her thin dress was no match for the cold, but she barely felt it. All her awareness was focused on the man in front of her, the man whose heart she'd broken without meaning to. "I need to explain," she tried again. "Explain what?" Now he did turn, and the pain in his eyes nearly brought her to her knees. "Explain how you lied to me for 6 months. How you let me believe you were someone you weren't. How you sat there in that coffee shop, day after day, playing pretend while I fell in love with a person who doesn't even exist." "She does exist," Zola said, her voice cracking. "I'm her. I'm still her." "Are you?" Kalen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because the woman I fell in love with was honest. She was real. She didn't have secrets." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the careful styling. "God, I'm such an idiot. All those times you deflected questions about your work, about your life. I thought you were just private. I thought you were protecting yourself because you'd been hurt before." "I was protecting myself," Zola said. "Just not the way you think." "Then explain it to me." Kalen's voice rose, anger bleeding through the hurt. "Make me understand why you couldn't tell me the truth. Why you had to lie." "I didn't lie," Zola said, then caught herself. "Okay, I lied by omission. But Kalen, everything else was real. The way I feel about you, the time we spent together, the life we were building, that was all real. Was it? He took a step toward her, his eyes searching her face. Because I told you everything. I told you about my family, about how much I hated their world, their obsession with money and status. I told you how good it felt to be with someone who didn't care about all that. Someone who loved me for who I was, not for my last name or my trust fund. His voice broke. And the whole time, you were part of that world. You were richer than all of them combined, and you never said a word. I'm not part of their world, Zola said fiercely. I built what I have from nothing, Kaylin. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Georgia. My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned houses. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, and I built Vance Capital with money I saved from a tech investment I made with my last $5,000. She was breathing hard now, years of carefully controlled emotion spilling out. I'm not like them. I never was. But you're a billionaire. Kaylin said it like an accusation. You have the kind of wealth they can only dream about, and you hid it from me. Because I knew this would happen. Zola's voice rose to match his. I knew that the moment you found out, everything would change. You'd look at me differently. You'd wonder if I was judging you, if I was using you, if anything between us was real. Money changes everything, Kaylin. It changes how people see you, how they treat you, what they want from you. So you decided to keep it from me? To let me make a fool of myself? You never made a fool of yourself. I bought you coffee, Kaylin said, his voice dropping to something raw and wounded. Every time we met at that shop, I insisted on buying your coffee because I thought, he stopped, swallowed hard. I thought you might be struggling. I thought I was helping. And you just let me. The memory hit Zola like a physical blow. All those small moments, Kaylin insisting on paying for meals, suggesting free activities because he thought she couldn't afford expensive ones, the time he tried to give her money for a new laptop because hers looked old. She'd thought it was sweet, endearing. She hadn't realized how patronizing it must seem now, in hindsight. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Kaylin. I should have told you. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was scared. Scared of losing this. Losing you. Well, you lost me anyway, didn't you? The words were quiet, but they cut deeper than anything he'd said yet. Zola felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Is that it, then? 6 months together, and one secret ends everything? It's not just a secret, Zola. It's who you are. Your entire identity. Kaylin's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Do you know what kills me most? That you thought I couldn't handle the truth. That you thought I was so shallow, so much like my family, that I'd treat you differently if I knew you had money. That's not why. Then why? He was close to her now, close enough that she could see the tears he was trying to hold back. Why couldn't you trust me? The question hung between them, and Zola realized she didn't have a good answer. Or maybe she did, and it was just too ugly to say out loud, that she'd been hiding for so long, she'd forgotten how to stop. That being invisible had kept her safe, and being seen, truly seen, terrified her more than any business deal ever could. Because I've spent 15 years being Zollivant's, she finally said. Building walls, hiding behind corporations and lawyers and anonymous investments. And then I met you, and for the first time in 15 years, I got to be just Zola. Not the billionaire, not the mysterious investor, just me. A woman in a coffee shop, falling in love. Her voice broke. And I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to lose the only real thing in my life. Kaylin stared at her, and she watched emotions war across his face, anger, hurt, understanding, love, betrayal, all tangled together into something too complex to name. You should have trusted me, he said finally. You should have let me make that choice. I know. The tears were falling now, hot against her cold cheeks. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For a long moment, they stood there in the dying light, the sounds of chaos from the ballroom behind them a distant murmur. Zola wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between them, but she didn't. This had to be his choice now. What would you do if someone you loved kept a secret this big from you? Could you forgive them, or would the betrayal be too deep? I need time, Kalen said finally, his voice hollow. I need to think. I need to figure out who you really are, and whether the woman I fell in love with ever actually existed. She existed, Zola said desperately. She exists. I'm right here. But Kalen was already walking away, back toward the house, back toward his family and the wreckage of his sister's wedding. Back toward a world where Zola was no longer sure she had a place. She stood alone on the frozen lawn and finally let herself break. 3 days passed in silence. Zola returned to her penthouse, the real one, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and enough space to feel like a museum. She'd always liked the emptiness before, the clean lines and minimal furniture that reflected her invisible life. Now it just felt lonely. She tried to work. Opened her laptop, reviewed investment proposals, responded to emails from her team of lawyers and advisors. But the numbers blurred on the screen, and she found herself staring out at the city instead, wondering what Kalen was doing, whether he was thinking about her, whether he'd ever forgive her. Her phone sat on the coffee table, silent and accusatory. She'd sent one text the day after the wedding, I meant what I said. Everything between us was real. I love you. He hadn't responded. The wedding, predictably, had become the scandal of the season. TMZ had somehow gotten wind of the story, mystery billionaire exposed at high society wedding, and the business press had gone wild trying to confirm whether Zola Nkosi was really Zolovans. Her lawyers were working overtime to keep her privacy intact, but the cat was out of the bag now. The invisible empire she'd built had a face. Her assistant had forwarded her a flood of interview requests, investment pitches, and social invitations. Victoria Sterling had called twice, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about clearing up misunderstandings and future partnerships. Clarissa had sent a scathing email that Zola had deleted without reading. But from Kalen, nothing. On the 4th day, Zola did something she hadn't done in years. She went back to the coffee shop on 7th Street. It looked exactly the same wobbling chairs, the same bad lighting, the same tired barista who brightened when she walked in. Hey. Haven't seen you in a while. The usual. Please, Zola said, and slid into her corner booth. She opened her laptop out of habit, but couldn't focus. Instead, she watched the door, hoping against hope that Kalen would walk through it the way he had dozens of times before. That he'd smile at her, slide into the seat across from her, and everything would go back to the way it was. But the door stayed closed. Excuse me. Zola looked up to find a young woman standing beside her table, phone in hand, eyes wide with recognition. I saw the news, and I just wanted to say, she fumbled for words. You're like, my hero. I'm starting my own business, and knowing that someone like you exists, that you built all that, she stopped, flushed. Sorry. I'm being weird. You're not being weird, Zola said gently. What kind of business? The woman lit up, and for the next 10 minutes, Zola found herself listening to an enthusiastic pitch about sustainable fashion and ethical manufacturing. It was rough around the edges, but the passion was there, and the core idea was sound. Send me a proposal, Zola heard herself say, pulling out a business card, a real one this time, with her name and the Vance Capital logo. I can't promise anything, but I'd like to see your numbers. The woman's hands shook as she took the card. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you so much. After she left, Zola sat back and felt something shift in her chest. Maybe being visible wasn't entirely terrible. Maybe there was something to be said for letting people see her, for using her success to help others instead of hiding behind corporate structures. Maybe Kaylin had been right. Maybe she'd been hiding so long, she'd forgotten why she started. The door opened again, and this time, her heart stopped. Kaylin stood in the doorway, his hair windblown, his eyes searching the shop until they landed on her. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well in days. Join the club, Zola thought. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Kaylin walked over and slid into the seat across from her, the same seat he'd occupied 100 times before. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." Zola's voice came out barely above a whisper. The barista appeared with Kaylin's usual order without being asked, black coffee, no sugar, and set it down with a knowing smile before disappearing again. Kaylin wrapped his hands around the cup but didn't drink. "I've been thinking," he said. "About everything. About us." Zola's heart hammered against her ribs. And I'm still angry. I'm still hurt." He met her eyes. "You lied to me, Zola. Or Zolovans. I don't even know what to call you anymore." "Zola," she said firmly. "That's my name. That's who I've always been. Zolovans is just a shield. A way to protect myself." "From what?" "From this." She gestured between them. "From people getting close enough to hurt me. From being judged for my money instead of who I am. She stopped, swallowed hard. From losing the one good thing in my life because I have too much of everything except what actually matters." Kaylin was quiet for a long moment. "My mother called me," he finally said. 12 times in 3 days. She wants to apologize to you, apparently. Wants to make amends." He said it with barely concealed disgust. "She spent 30 minutes on the phone explaining how she didn't know who you were, how it was all a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Zola said, echoing the words she'd spoken at the wedding. "That was them. That's who they are." "I know." Kaylin's jaw tightened. "I told her that if she couldn't genuinely apologize, not because you're rich, but because she was cruel to someone I love, then she shouldn't bother calling again." Zola's breath caught. "You said that?" "I did." He finally took a sip of his coffee, grimaced at the temperature. "I also told my father that I'm done with the family business. Done with the expectations, the social obligations, all of it. I'm going to focus on my architecture, on building things that matter instead of maintaining appearances." "Kaylin. Let me finish." He set down his cup, his eyes intense. "I've spent my whole life trying to escape my family's world. And then I met you, and I thought I'd found someone who understood. Someone who wanted the same simple, honest life I wanted." He paused. "But here's what I realized over the past few days, I was doing the same thing to you that my family does. I was putting you in a box, deciding who you should be instead of accepting who you are." Zola felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "I should have told you." "Yes, you should have." There was no anger in his voice now, just sadness. "But I also should have made you feel safe enough to tell me. I spent so much time talking about how much I hated wealth and status that I never stopped to think about what that might mean for you. That maybe you were afraid I'd reject you for having money the same way my family rejected you for not having it." "I was afraid," Zola admitted. "I'm still afraid. Because you were right, Kaylin. Money does change things. It changes how people see you, what they want from you. And with you, for the first time in 15 years, I got to be seen for just me. But that wasn't really you, was it?" Kaylin said gently. "That was you hiding. And I don't want you to hide, Zola. Not from me. Not from anyone." "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "I've been invisible for so long." "Then learn." He reached across the table and took her hand, and the touch sent warmth flooding through her chest. "We'll figure it out together. But no more secrets. No more hiding. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. Even if it's messy. Especially if it's messy. A small smile tugged at his lips. I've seen your family's world, and I've seen mine. They're both toxic in their own ways. So maybe we build something different. Something that's just ours. Zola squeezed his hand, barely daring to hope. You still want this? Us? I never stopped wanting us, Kalen said. I just needed to figure out who us actually is. And I think, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I think we're two people who've both been running from something. You from being seen, me from my family's expectations. Maybe it's time we both stopped running. And if the world won't leave us alone? If the press keeps hounding us, if your family keeps interfering? Then we deal with it together. Kalen's grip tightened on her hand. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more hiding who you are. Not your wealth, not your success, not any of it. If you're going to be with me, I need all of you. The coffee shop Zola and the billionaire Zollivants. Because they're both you, and I want to love all of you. The tears were falling now, hot against Zola's cheeks. I promise. No more hiding. Kalen stood up, pulling her with him, and wrapped her in his arms. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. I love you, she said, muffled against his shirt. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you sooner. I love you too, he murmured into her hair. And I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to hide. They stood there in the middle of the coffee shop, holding each other while the barista pretended not to watch and other customers smiled at the obvious reconciliation. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos, cars honking, people rushing past, the world turning whether they were ready or not. But in this moment, in this small corner of the world where their story had begun, everything felt right. So what now? Zola asked, pulling back to look up at him. Kalen smiled, the real smile, the one that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. Now we start over. Hi, I'm Kalen Sterling. I'm an architect who hates his family's money but is working on being less judgy about it.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for tuning in and watching this video. You being here is the best encouragement I could ask for. The simplest and best way to show your support and tell me you want to see more content is to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's your way of sending me love. I don't want the adventure to stop yet though. To enjoy more thrilling videos, go ahead and click the next video thumbnail you see right now. Enjoy and thanks again.